The garden was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses as Alice's engagement party reached its peak. Guests mingled around tables laden with food and glasses of champagne, while a live band played soft music in the background. Alice stood in the centre of it all, glowing in a pale pink dress that perfectly matched the rose decorations scattered throughout the venue. Rebecca, Alice's best friend, stood near the edge of the crowd, clutching a glass of wine. Her smile was fixed, but her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass as she watched Alice and Daniel greet the guests together. They looked perfect, a picture of love and happiness. Daniel had his arm around Alice's waist, leaning down to whisper something in her ear that made her laugh. Rebecca's chest tightened. She turned away, taking a sip of her wine. This should have been my moment. I met him first. He should be with me, she thought bitterly. As the party continued, Rebecca slipped away to a quiet corner of the garden. She leaned against a tree, watching Alice and Daniel from a distance. They were laughing with a group of friends, their hands intertwined. Her thoughts spiraled. I met him first. He liked me. If it wasn't for Alice, he would have chosen me. She always takes what I want. For years, Rebecca had lived in Alice's shadow, first as the beautiful, admired girl in their childhood, and now as the successful woman with the perfect fiancé. Rebecca's jealousy, which had simmered for so long, began to boil over. What if I could separate them, she thought. The idea was small at first, just a flicker. But as the night wore on, it grew into something darker and more dangerous. Rebecca's gaze hardened as she watched Daniel lean down to kiss Alice's cheek. She doesn't deserve him. I'll make sure she loses him, and then he'll see who truly belongs by his side. As the engagement party wound down, Rebecca walked back into the crowd, her mind already working. She would find a way to break them apart, piece by piece. Alice spotted her and smiled, waving her over. Come on, Becca. One last group picture before everyone leaves. Rebecca joined them, standing beside Alice as the photographer counted down. As the flash went off, Rebecca smiled, but her thoughts were far from friendly. You won't be smiling for long, Alice. Alice and Rebecca's friendship had not always been like this. Everything seemed innocent when they met at age 8. They met at primary school, when Alice, dressed neatly and reading under a mango tree, noticed Rebecca struggling with broken chalk during hopscotch. Here, Alice said, offering her extra chalk with a smile. Rebecca accepted, and their friendship began. Alice, the privileged daughter of a wealthy businessman, and Rebecca, the child of a struggling single mother who worked as a seamstress, were an unlikely pair. But they became inseparable. At first, Rebecca adored Alice. She admired the way Alice's presence seemed to command attention, how teachers praised her intelligence, and how her family's car always waited at the school gate to pick her up. To Rebecca, Alice lived in a fairy tale. Alice invited Rebecca over to her home often. The first time Rebecca stepped into the sprawling 2-story house, her jaw dropped. The tiled floors gleamed, and the smell of fresh-baked bread wafted through the air. There were more rooms than Rebecca could count, and the backyard had a garden so lush it looked like something from a postcard. Alice's mother treated Rebecca warmly, always sending her home with gifts of food or little trinkets. Alice, Rebecca said one day while sitting in the garden, your life is so perfect. Alice laughed, brushing it off. It's just normal. You're my best friend, so it's your life too. But Rebecca didn't feel that way. The more time she spent in Alice's world, the more she became aware of her own. She'd return to their cramped one-bedroom apartment and find her mother hunched over her sewing machine, her face tired. She'd look at the cracked walls and peeling paint and feel a pang of shame. Alice never meant to make her feel that way. She even tried to help by paying for Rebecca's school supplies or inviting her on family trips. But those gestures, meant to lift Rebecca, often made her feel small. As they grew older, the gap between their lives seemed to widen. In secondary school, Alice blossomed into the girl everyone wanted to be. She excelled in academics, was elected class prefect, and had boys constantly vying for her attention. Rebecca, though bright in her own right, always felt like a shadow next to Alice's light. She worked hard to keep up, but no matter how much effort she put in, Alice always seemed effortlessly better. When they both graduated and moved to Accra for university, their friendship continued, but Rebecca's feelings of inadequacy deepened. Alice landed internships through her father's connections, while Rebecca spent her weekends working part-time jobs to pay for her books and rent. Alice always included Rebecca in her social circle, introducing her to her wealthy friends and making sure she felt included. But instead of gratitude, Rebecca felt resentment. Everything came to a head when they met Daniel. Rebecca met him first at a small cafe near campus. He was charming and had an easy smile that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt before. They talked for hours about their dreams and ambitions. Rebecca felt a spark and began to imagine a future where, for once, she could have something Alice didn't. Then Alice met Daniel. It was at a party Rebecca had invited her to. Alice, as always, dazzled. Her laughter carried across the room, and her beauty drew Daniel's attention almost immediately. Rebecca noticed the shift as Daniel's focus moved from her to Alice. By the end of the night, he and Alice were exchanging numbers, and Rebecca stood by, invisible once again. "Rebecca, isn't Daniel amazing?" Alice gushed one evening after one of their dates. She sat on the couch in their shared apartment, her face glowing with excitement. "He's smart, funny, and kind. I think he could be the one." Rebecca forced a smile. "Yeah, he's great." Inside, her heart ached. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself that Alice didn't know how she felt about Daniel. But the bitterness lingered. As Alice and Daniel's relationship deepened, Rebecca's envy turned into something darker. She began to resent Alice for always having what she couldn't, for always being the one who shined brightest. Alice, oblivious to Rebecca's growing resentment, continued to treat her as a sister. She involved Rebecca in her life with Daniel, often inviting her on outings or asking for advice. Rebecca played along, but her mind churned with thoughts of how to drive a wedge between them. She whispered half-truths to Daniel, hinted at doubts to Alice, and tried to sabotage their relationship. Yet no matter what she did, Alice and Daniel's bond only seemed to grow stronger. By the time Alice and Daniel announced their engagement, Rebecca felt as though she'd lost everything. The final insult was being asked to stand as Alice's maid of honor. She accepted with a forced smile, even as she seethed inside. After the engagement party, Alice and Daniel dove headfirst into wedding preparations, their excitement palpable. Watching Alice plan her perfect wedding, and knowing Daniel was completely hers, was unbearable for Rebecca. She became increasingly bitter, her resentment fueled by every conversation, every smile, and every little display of Alice and Daniel's love. Rebecca spent her days replaying moments from the party in her mind. She thought about the way Daniel had looked at Alice, his eyes filled with adoration. It gnawed at her, a constant reminder of how invisible she felt. Sitting in her small apartment one evening, Rebecca stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her jaw tightened as she whispered to herself, "Why is it always her? Why does she get everything?" Her thoughts spiraled. She convinced herself that Alice's happiness came at her expense, that Alice always had to outshine her. And now Daniel, someone Rebecca had secretly dreamed of, was another thing Alice had taken without even knowing. Alice, oblivious to Rebecca's feelings, leaned on her best friend for support as the wedding planning intensified. "Becca, I can't do this without you," Alice said one afternoon as they sat in a cafe, surrounded by fabric swatches and wedding magazines. "You've always been my rock." Rebecca forced a smile. "Of course, Alice, I'm here for you." But every task Alice handed her felt like a burden. Rebecca didn't want to help. She wanted to ruin everything. Rebecca started with minor disruptions, testing the waters. She knew she couldn't act too boldly just yet. Alice trusted her completely, and any obvious move could shatter that trust too soon. First, she lost important contact information. Rebecca had volunteered to handle communication with one of the vendors, a local florist known for their stunning arrangements. She conveniently misplaced the florist's contact details, forcing Alice to scramble to find a replacement. "Becca, I can't believe this happened," Alice said over the phone, her voice frantic. "The florist is fully booked now. I don't know what to do." Rebecca pretended to feel bad. "I'm so sorry, Alice. I swear I wrote it down. I'll help you find someone else." Next, Rebecca deliberately gave Alice the wrong date for a key meeting with the wedding planner, causing her to miss it. When Alice realized the mistake, she called Rebecca in a panic. "Becca, I thought the meeting was tomorrow. The planner said it was today." Rebecca gasped on the other end of the line. "Oh no, I must have misread the email. I'm so sorry, Alice. I feel awful." Rebecca's small acts of sabotage had worked well enough to unsettle Alice and Daniel, but they weren't enough for her. She wanted to leave a mark, something that would make Alice question everything about her perfect life. Sitting at her desk one night, Rebecca began drafting a plan that would escalate her interference. Rebecca created a fake email address and started sending cryptic messages to Alice. Her goal wasn't to directly accuse Daniel of anything, but to plant seeds of doubt that would grow over time. One email read, "Alice, be careful who you trust. Not everyone is as honest as they seem." Another said, "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who betray us the most. Just think about that." Alice read the emails late at night, her heart pounding. She showed them to Daniel the next evening as they sat on the couch. "Look at these," she said, handing him her phone. Daniel frowned, scrolling through the messages. "Who would send something like this? Do you think it's one of your friends messing around?" Alice shook her head. "No one I know would do this. It's just, weird. Why would someone send this to me?" Daniel shrugged, handing the phone back. "It's probably nothing. Just some troll. Ignore it." Alice nodded but couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. Rebecca decided to take things further by targeting some of the critical elements of the wedding. She called the wedding cake vendor, pretending to be Alice, and cancelled the order. When Alice called the bakery a week before the wedding to confirm the delivery details, she was shocked. "We don't have your order on file," the baker said. "You cancelled it 2 weeks ago." "What? No, I didn't cancel anything," Alice exclaimed, her voice rising. The baker apologized but said it was too late to accommodate her order now. Alice hung up and immediately called Rebecca, tears streaming down her face. "Becca, the bakery says I cancelled the cake order. I didn't, I swear. What am I going to do?" Rebecca faked shock, her voice filled with sympathy. "Oh no, Alice, that's awful. Maybe they mixed up your name with someone else's. Don't worry. I'll help you find another bakery. We'll figure this out." Alice sniffled, her gratitude evident. "Thanks, Becca. I don't know what I'd do without you." Rebecca smiled to herself, knowing she had successfully created more stress for Alice. Rebecca's most elaborate move came a week before the wedding. She orchestrated a scenario where Daniel appeared to be flirting or acting inappropriately. She hired Amma, a mutual acquaintance in need of quick cash, to approach Daniel at a bar and act friendly. Over coffee, Rebecca explained the plan to Amma. "All you need to do is talk to him, laugh and be a little flirty," Rebecca said. Amma hesitated but agreed for the money. Rebecca picked a night she knew Daniel would be at a bar on Oxford Street. That evening, Rebecca parked nearby, watching as Amma, dressed sharply, walked in. Amma approached Daniel, who was sitting at the counter with a drink. "Hi," Amma said with a smile. "You look familiar. Do you work at Africorps?" Daniel looked up, surprised. "I do, but no ads. You've got the wrong guy." Amma laughed and sat beside him. "Well, your face is hard to miss." She struck up a conversation, laughing and lightly touching his arm as Rebecca had instructed. From her car, Rebecca smirked as she texted Alice, "Hey, I just drove past the lounge on Oxford Street. I thought I saw Daniel inside with a woman. I'm probably wrong, but it looked close. Just thought you'd want to know." Later that night, Alice confronted Daniel. "Were you out tonight? Rebecca said she saw you with someone." Daniel, confused, replied, "I met an old colleague for a drink. It was nothing." The incident didn't lead to a fight, but Rebecca noticed the way it made Alice more cautious and slightly distant. Rebecca's actions after the engagement party were deliberate and relentless, designed to chip away at Alice's happiness little by little. Though her schemes hadn't caused a complete collapse yet, the strain on Alice and Daniel's relationship was undeniable. For Rebecca, it was only the beginning. When Alice and Daniel's wedding day finally arrived, Rebecca stood by as the maid of honor, smiling through her pain. She watched Alice walk down the aisle in her stunning gown, watched Daniel's eyes fill with love as he vowed to spend his life with her. Rebecca clapped along with the rest of the guests, but inside, she made a silent promise. "This isn't over. I'll get back what's mine, no matter what it takes." It was that moment when Rebecca's jealousy turned into a dark obsession, setting the stage for the betrayal and tragedy that would follow. Weeks turned into months after Alice and Daniel's wedding. Alice was radiant in her new life as a wife, and the couple seemed inseparable. Social media posts showed them at fancy dinners, weekend getaways, and charity events. Rebecca saw every single one of them, her heart burning with jealousy. She couldn't escape the reminder that Daniel was no longer hers to dream about. He was Alice's husband. Over time, Rebecca's jealousy festered into obsession. She began finding reasons to visit Alice and Daniel's house unannounced, always timing her visits for when Alice was out running errands. Daniel, being polite, welcomed her. Rebecca used these moments to charm him subtly, complimenting his work, showing interest in his hobbies, and laughing a little too hard at his jokes. "You've always been so ambitious, Daniel," Rebecca said one afternoon, sitting across from him in the living room. "Alice is lucky to have you." Daniel smiled, but there was a flicker of discomfort in his expression. "Thanks, Becca. Alice and I make a good team." Rebecca nodded, her mind spinning. A good team, she thought. But we'd be better. Rebecca became bolder with her intentions. She started sending Daniel texts, casual at first, but then more personal. One evening, Rebecca showed up with a home-cooked meal for the couple. Alice welcomed her warmly as always. "You're too sweet, Becca," Alice said as she set the table. "You've always taken such good care of me." Rebecca forced a smile. "Of course. That's what friends are for." As they ate, Rebecca subtly steered the conversation toward Daniel. She asked him about his work, his goals, his plans for the future. Alice, trusting as ever, didn't notice how Rebecca leaned in when Daniel spoke, or how her laughter lingered when he made a joke. That night, as Rebecca left, Alice kissed Daniel on the cheek. "We're lucky to have her," she said. "She's been through so much. I'm glad she has us." Daniel nodded but said nothing, a shadow of unease passing across his face. Rebecca's frustration boiled over after an event celebrating Alice's new promotion at work. At the party, Alice was the centre of attention as always, beautiful, accomplished, adored. Even Daniel looked at her with pure admiration, and Rebecca felt invisible. After the party, Rebecca sat in her room, staring at a photo of Alice and Daniel on social media. Her jealousy turned into resolve. She doesn't deserve him. She's had everything handed to her. I've worked for everything I've ever had. Daniel deserves someone who understands struggle. Someone like me. That night, as Rebecca sat in her room, staring at a photo of Alice and Daniel, her jealousy had consumed her, and now it was whispering dangerous ideas into her mind. If Alice were gone, everything would be different. I could finally have the life I deserve. Rebecca knew it was wrong, but the thought refused to leave her. Rebecca began researching ways to eliminate Alice. She wanted it to look natural, an accident, an illness, something no one would question. She started buying supplies discreetly and planning every detail. The jealousy that had festered for years had turned into something darker, a plan to take Alice out of the picture forever. Rebecca's plan took root in her mind, growing more detailed each day. She spent hours researching online, carefully considering how to make Alice's death look like a natural tragedy. The guilt that flickered in her heart was quickly smothered by her burning jealousy. She convinced herself that she deserved Daniel and that Alice's perfect life was never meant to last. The day Rebecca decided to set her plan into motion was a bright Saturday morning in Accra. The bustling streets outside were filled with the sounds of honking cars, vendors shouting about their wares, and children playing football. But inside Rebecca's tiny, dimly lit room, the world was quiet. Too quiet. She stared at the small vial in her hand, the poison she had bought from an old man at a market stall. Her heart raced as she read the handwritten label. Silent and swift. It was all she needed to end Alice's perfect life and finally claim the happiness she believed was rightfully hers. That evening, Rebecca arrived at Alice and Daniel's house with a bag of groceries. She wore her most charming smile, masking the storm brewing inside her. Alice opened the door, her face lighting up. "Becca, you're a lifesaver. I've been so busy today," Alice said, pulling Rebecca into a warm hug. Rebecca's stomach churned at the affection. If only you knew what's coming, she thought. But she forced herself to smile. "I thought you could use a break," Rebecca said cheerfully, holding up the groceries. "I'll cook dinner for you and Daniel." Alice clapped her hands together, beaming. "That's so sweet. Let me know if you need any help." In the kitchen, Rebecca worked quickly, slicing vegetables and stirring the soup pot on the stove. The aroma of spices filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of conversation coming from the living room where Alice and Daniel sat. Rebecca glanced over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the vial from her bag and uncapped it. "This is it," she thought, her heart pounding. With one swift motion, she poured the poison into the soup and stirred until it dissolved completely. The act was simple, almost mundane, yet it felt like the world had shifted. "Becca, that smells amazing," Alice called out from the living room. Rebecca forced a laugh. "It'll be ready in a minute." When dinner was served, Rebecca's hands were steady, her smile warm. She placed the steaming bowls of soup in front of Alice and Daniel, then sat across from them, her own bowl untouched. "This looks incredible," Daniel said, lifting his spoon. Rebecca watched as Alice took her first bite. She waited, her pulse quickening, as Alice smiled and nodded. "This is delicious," Alice said, turning to Rebecca. "You've outdone yourself." Rebecca's lips curled into a small smile. "I'm glad you like it." The minutes ticked by. Alice continued eating, chatting with Daniel about their plans. Rebecca sat silently, barely hearing their words, her eyes fixed on Alice's face. Then it happened. Alice's hand froze mid-air, the spoon slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the plate. Her eyes widened, and she clutched her chest. "Daniel," she gasped, her voice weak. Daniel immediately stood, panic flooding his face. "Alice? What's wrong?" Alice struggled to speak, her breathing turning shallow. She collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling. "Call an ambulance," Rebecca shouted, her voice sharp with fake urgency. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Alice, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. Rebecca stood back, her expression a mix of concern and calm. Inside, she felt a strange satisfaction. It's done. She's gone. The ambulance arrived in minutes, paramedics rushing in and carrying Alice out on a stretcher. Daniel followed them, leaving Rebecca alone in the house. She stood in the quiet living room. A sense of triumph washed over her. This is my chance. Daniel will be mine now. Rebecca picked up her bag and left, walking down the empty streets of Accra as the night fell. The weight of what she had done was heavy, but the promise of the life she had longed for kept her moving forward. Alice is gone, she told herself. Now everything will fall into place. The next day, Rebecca received a call from Daniel. His voice was broken, filled with grief. "She's gone," he said. "The doctors said it was a heart attack." Rebecca clutched the phone, forcing tears into her voice. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening." "She loved you, Becca," Daniel said. "She always said you were her sister." Rebecca swallowed hard, guilt and triumph battling inside her. "I'll be here for you, Daniel, whatever you need." As the weeks passed, Rebecca became a constant presence in Daniel's life. She comforted him, cooked for him, and handled tasks he couldn't bring himself to do. Slowly, Daniel began to lean on her, and Rebecca saw her chance. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Daniel turned to her. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Rebecca. You've been my rock." Rebecca smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "That's what friends are for, Daniel. I'll always be here for you." Her heart swelled with satisfaction. The life she had always wanted was finally within her grasp. Alice was gone, and soon Daniel would be hers. But what Rebecca didn't realize was that her actions had set a chain of events into motion that she couldn't control. The perfect life she had fought for was about to unravel in ways she never imagined. Months after Alice's death, Rebecca and Daniel grew closer. Daniel was heartbroken, but Rebecca made herself indispensable. She was always there, cooking, cleaning, and lending a listening ear. She comforted him in his darkest moments, and eventually he began to see her as more than a friend. One evening, Daniel invited Rebecca over for dinner. It was a quiet night, and the air was heavy with the sound of crickets outside. As they sat at the dining table, Daniel poured Rebecca a glass of wine. "You've done so much for me, Rebecca," he said, his voice soft. "I don't know how I would have survived without you." Rebecca smiled, her heart racing. "I just wanted to be there for you." Alice would have wanted that. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking about us. Maybe we could start fresh together. What do you think?" Rebecca's heart leapt with joy. This was what she had dreamed of. "I think that sounds perfect," she replied, her voice trembling with excitement. 2 years later, Rebecca and Daniel were married in a small, private ceremony. The house that had once belonged to Alice now felt like Rebecca's kingdom. She had finally taken Alice's place and was living the life she believed she deserved. But the happiness didn't last long. One day, while cleaning their bedroom, Daniel stumbled upon an old notebook tucked into a drawer. It was Rebecca's, and as he flipped through its pages, his brow furrowed. Inside, he found notes written in Rebecca's handwriting, detailed plans about Alice's death. There were mentions of poison, research on how to make it look like a heart attack, and even sketches of timelines and steps to avoid suspicion. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the words. His stomach churned with disbelief and rage. "Rebecca killed Alice. She took everything from me." That evening, when Rebecca returned home, she found Daniel sitting in the living room, the notebook on the table in front of him. His expression was cold, his jaw tight. "What's this, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with anger. Rebecca froze, her eyes darting to the notebook. She felt her stomach drop. I don't know how that got there," she stammered. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, standing up. "Don't lie to me! Did you kill Alice?" Rebecca opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening, and Daniel's face twisted with disgust. I trusted you, he said, his voice breaking. Alice trusted you. She loved you like a sister, and you killed her. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said weakly. She had everything. I loved you, Daniel. I did it for us. There is no us, Daniel said, stepping back as if her presence repulsed him. You destroyed my life. You destroyed Alice. Daniel called the police that night, and Rebecca was arrested. During her interrogation, she confessed everything: her jealousy, her plan to kill Alice, and her obsession with taking Alice's place. The weight of her actions finally crushed her, and she realized there was no way out. As Rebecca sat in a cold, grey prison cell, she thought about everything she had lost. Her friendship with Alice, her freedom, and even the love she had fought so hard for were gone. She had destroyed everything in her pursuit of a perfect life that was never meant to be hers. Meanwhile, Daniel sold the house and moved away from Accra, unable to bear the memories of Alice or the betrayal he had suffered. He started a new life, carrying with him the scars of the past. Rebecca remained behind bars, haunted by the ghost of Alice and the choices that had led her there. The life she had so desperately wanted was gone, replaced by regret and a loneliness that would never fade. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more great content. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might enjoy it too. See you in the next one.